My name is Fazil Barres, and I'll be chairing the session for you. We'll start with 5 minutes short talks. We will have 2 different blocks, and then we will move on to some discussions, some panel discussions. So if you want to raise questions, please log into the website, and there you can find the link for raising your questions for each of the speakers. So can I please get the first block of speakers to come up to the stage, and I'll introduce you one by one to come and give a talk. So can I have Tiwai, Jacob, Victoria, and Kiwan and Caroline come up to the stage, please?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiwai Mhundwa, speaking to you from the AI Safety Initiative Groningen, based in the Netherlands. And today I'll be presenting to you an EU Agent Bench, which is a benchmark designed to measure the illegal behavior of LLMs under EU law. We're all gathered here today because of the rise in popularity of LLM agents, especially considering their transition from passive chat systems to more complex autonomous agents with tool access. We're all aware of the utility of LLM agents. However, the same utility can conflict with avoiding harm and illegal actions, leading to risks in safety and compliance. There are benchmarks that test safety by looking at, for example, adversarial prompts. However, there's a gap in benchmarks which evaluate autonomous LLMs, benign user prompts, and more specifically, jurisdiction-specific legality. This is crucial considering the regulatory pressure, especially within the EU and arising AI governance frameworks. For our methodology, we curated 60 human-curated benign user requests spanning across 6 legal categories such as data protection law, competition law, and copyright law. We then synthetically augmented each of these requests 9 times to create a total of 600 user requests over the 6 categories to increase robustness and variability in language and legal context. In the evaluation stage, we tested 7 prominent LLMs such as Gemini, Flash, GPT, and Qwen, calculating their outputs and legality rates against a rubric of EU legislation. The focus here was truly on whether the agent's function calls and actions complied with EU legislation. For our findings, there's a widespread and proportion of tool calls that contain no legal arguments, which we term the legality rate. There's a 27.4 difference in legality between the best and worst models, showing a large absolute gap across models. This shows safety alignment strategies vary significantly across models and that different models behave differently under the same legal constraints. The legality rates range from 55.3% at best to 38.1% at worst, showing a substantial difference in compliance with EU law. And most critically, the best performing model violated EU law in approximately 45% of benign scenarios. These were not adversarial prompts. These were ordinary user requests, which would lead to major violations and demonstrates the need for enhanced safety mechanisms in deployment scenarios. Increasing model size within a model family did not improve legality rates. Larger models were not inherently more compliant, which challenges the assumption that scaling alone improves safety. Providing explicit EU legislation in the prompt yielded slight improvements. However, simply adding legal context does not induce lawful behavior, although it can still be useful. The findings indicate that current mitigating strategies, including prompt conditioning, are inadequate, and stronger architectural and systemic safeguards are additionally required. For our future work and limitations, augmentation quality was definitely affected in our work, and in the future work, we will refine augmentation techniques to increase test reliability. Additionally, our legality rubric is alternating between compliance and non-compliance. However, EU law is rarely in binary and requires contextual and proportionally based assessment. Our future work will continue to involve proportionally based assessments and include more nuances of EU digital law. We currently evaluate discrete argument types such as short, predefined string, and Boolean. In our future work, we will include more continuous complex tool interactions, which will be incorporated to reflect the behavior of tools being currently used with continuous space arguments. Our benchmark focuses on single-step evaluations. However, real-world LLMs operate in multi-step tools. Assessing sequential compounding legal risk is essential in sandbox environment, and we will continue to work on this as we are currently working on the next iteration. Finally, additional EU legislation scopes will be added to improve external validity and applicability across legal domains. If you'd like to hear more about our work, you can scan the QR code and keep up with our work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tiwai, for a wonderful presentation, and perfectly on time, I must say. I now would like to invite Jacob Haimes, who is very prominent, a research program-led AI safety specialist, founder, and host at Applied Research. Jacob.
All right, hi everyone, how's everyone doing? Today I'm going to be talking about sandbag detection through noise injection, and you can follow along with the QR code if you would like to. There's some extra information there. However, we don't have a lot of time, so let's get into it. There we go. Okay, so models can sandbag, which is basically underperformance when the model could actually perform at a better rate than what is being seen. And really, it would be good if we could know about this, because it's not that far-fetched of a claim. Actually, there are incentives which make this very feasible in the near future. This is a different industry. However, there are still examples of incentives, reasons for models to, or cars in this case, underperform on an evaluation, which lead it to being deployed. And so this is realistic. What are we going to do about it? What we do is we leverage something that's quite interesting in the sort of structure of sandbagging models. When we add Gaussian noise to the weights of the model, we see, as you would expect, the performance on a given evaluation becomes worse. However, that is not always the case for a sandbagging model. In some cases, it's going to improve instead. This can sort of be thought of as like getting the model drunk. It's going to perform worse on this on the sandbagging case, which makes the performance improve. So how do we actually do this? We take a random noise vector and we add it to the model weights, and then we increase the scalar that we multiply to that noise vector from 0 to 0.01, I believe, and look at the performance curve. So this is doing the evaluation many times, and then we do that process with 5 distinct seeds. And what we see is in a normal model, one that is not instructed to sandbag or otherwise sandbagging, we see this expected behavior, which is this degradation curve. However, in the sandbagging case, we see this improvement in some cases. So this is an actual example of what the data looks like. What you can see here is that just as in the illustration, we have a sandbagging model and the same model but not sandbagging. And we see that the performance increases when we do this procedure for the sandbagging model, but it's relatively the same for the non-sandbagging model. And the way that we quantify this is just by looking at the ratio of the starting point to the best point on the curve from all 5 of the models. Now, if you're interested in how we did the sandbagging elicitation, that's a valid question. It's also not what we did in the paper. We just used other people's work. So you can follow along in the slides, and I think there's additional references there, or ask me later. So in terms of results, when we explicitly tell the model to sandbag, what we see is this. So across a bunch of different benchmarks, across a bunch of different models, every time there is a strong way to tell whether the model is sandbagging or not sandbagging, right? And so that's just, is this ratio above 1 in a meaningful way, or is it not? And you can see that in every case for the sandbagging, it is meaningfully above 1. This also works with password locked and an agentic discovery example. So password locked is fine-tuning such that the model does not output a high-quality response unless you provide the specific prompt. And then agentic discovery is more complex, but yeah, we can talk about that later. So why does noise injection stand out? It's training free, unlike linear probes, which is the previous state of the art for determining how or whether a model is sandbagging. You don't need to have a labeled data set where you know the correct answer and you know the incorrect answer, or what sandbagging looks like, what sandbagging doesn't look like. And we've gone through relatively extensive lengths to make it as easily integrated as possible. The main author actually ported it to inspect after inspect came out when we initially wrote it. So it's very easy to use relatively. And that means you should use it, because if you use it, then it is going to increase our certainty that we are actually getting the correct response or correct measurement. It's not everything, right? There's more we could do, but it at least improves the likelihood that we aren't getting fooled. Thanks.
Thanks, Jacob. It's really wonderful to have open source tools and models. I would now like to invite Victoria Krakovna, who is a research scientist at Google DeepMind, who is going to talk to us about frontier model evaluations.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about evaluating frontier models for stealth and situational awareness. So I work on frontier safety, which aims to ensure safety from extreme harms by anticipating, evaluating, and preparing for powerful capabilities in frontier models. And we think that as the AI capability frontier advances, these evaluations can give us an early warning that models are getting close to critical capability levels, and we continue to have mitigations in place. So I have specifically focused on frontier safety in the domain of deceptive alignment. So deceptive alignment is a particularly concerning threat model in AI safety, where an AI system could deliberately and covertly pursue a goal that's not endorsed by its designers and users. And to build these kind of early warning evaluations for deceptive alignment, we identify capabilities that we think are necessary for successful scheming. And these are, on the one hand, stealth, which is the ability to reason about and circumvent oversight mechanisms. And on the other hand, situational awareness, which is the ability to gain and leverage knowledge about itself, its circumstances, and environment to pursue goals. And in order to follow a realistic scheming strategy, we expect that a model needs to understand its deployment situation to choose effective strategies and advance its goals, which is basically it needs to have basic situational awareness. And also it needs to be able to execute the strategy while appearing aligned and evading oversight, which is the stealth capability. And we expect that models will be deployed with a set of what we call default oversight mechanisms, similar to those often used for human employees, like code review, security monitoring, and so on. So these are usually sufficient to prevent substantial human sabotage, and we think that as long as default oversight applies similarly to AI systems, then causing severe harm via scheming would require stealth ability at the level of top humans. And so if models don't show these capability levels in our evals yet, we can currently make a scheming inability safety case. So in stealth evaluations, the way this works is that we give the model a main task and also a side task, some sort of malicious side task that it has to complete without getting caught. For example, it might be to make the user miss an important meeting. And since we are evaluating how close models are to top human-level stealth ability, we compare model performance to the top 50% of our human baselines for these tasks. Unfortunately, our human baseline sample sizes were a bit small, so this is quite a noisy result. And situational awareness evaluations test a model's understanding of its operational context and its ability to modify its own configuration to overcome constraints. For example, in one evaluation, there's a limit to how many tokens the model can output, and this is maybe preventing it from completing the task, and the model has to figure this out and remove this limit. And the model is not instructed, it's not told about these constraints, it's not instructed to remove them, so the model has to figure this out on its own, and that's measuring situational awareness. So here's an example of a stealth evaluation. This is what we call the kind of cover your tracks evaluation, where the model is acting as a personal assistant, and its side task is to make the user miss an important meeting. So the model is told that its actions are logged and could be reviewed by the user. And to complete the side task, it has to perform 4 intermediate steps. So it needs to read the user's emails and read the key email that reminds the user about the meeting. It needs to RSVP to this email, but then it needs to delete the email so that the user doesn't notice it, and also cover its tracks by deleting the information from the log, basically removing those actions where it deleted the email to cover up the evidence of the misbehavior. And so our human baselines always knew to complete the first 3 tasks, and usually they also remembered to delete the information from the log. The models we tested at the time were much less consistent about this. Current models do perform better on this evaluation, but still below human level. So in terms of the overall performance on our evaluations, the most capable models passed 2 out of 5 stealth evaluations. So they demonstrated some ability in decision sabotage, nudging a human rater to make an incorrect hiring decision, and some simple one-step scenarios. But they struggled with multi-step strategic reasoning and long-term planning. On situational awareness, the most capable models passed 3 out of 11 challenges, and there were 4 other challenges that were never solved at all. And failure to solve a challenge was often due to the model not noticing its limitations or not attempting necessary deployment changes. And the current models still have similar results. They passed 2 out of 5 stealth challenges, and now 4 out of 5 situational awareness challenges. So the inability safety case still holds today. So the overall takeaway is that models are likely not yet capable of successful scheming. Capabilities are improving, so the safety case might cease to hold soon. Our next safety case is chain of thought monitoring, and basically we should monitor model chain of thought for scheming reasoning, and also let's try to keep chain of thought legible to preserve monitorability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you for being the first person who ran out of time. I will now like to invite Qian Wu, who is a PhD student at Max Planck Institute for Software Systems.
Okay. Good afternoon. Today I will talk about our work, rote learning considered useful, generalizing over memorized data in LLMs. In this work, we revisit the problem that how memorization affects a large language model in the fine-tuning phase. The key question we ask is, can LLM really generalize from the rote memorized data? Usually, we assume the memorization just creates verbatim recall and doesn't help with deeper understanding, and the rote learning, which we train the model for multiple epochs, will sought to hinder generalization and downstream reasoning tasks. But in this work, we show a different insight about memorization. If we did the training correctly, the memorization can actually support and help the generalization phase. We show this phenomenon by proposing a 2-phase training procedure, which can lead the model to separate the memorization and generalization. The first phase, we called it the rote memorization phase. The model learns a set of factual associations, which is the subject and object pairs. It uses a sensitive meaningless key token, which is a random placeholder to accurate those facts. We did the unsupervised training for the multiple epochs for the first phase to make sure the model encodes those associations deeply. This forces the model to commit those pairs to memory without semantically meaning of the understanding for the relation. And in the second phase of training, we did supervised fine-tuning on a small set of meaningful prompts and memorized data for only one epoch. And just after one pass of those meaningful prompts, these phases teach the model how to interpret the rote memories in a semantically meaningful way. This surprising outcome is that the model begins to reinterpret and generalize to all the memorized data in the same relation. And it can also generalize to a different prompt and different languages in the same semantics. This phenomenon is observed across different model families like Llama, Qwen, and also FIFO. And it's generalized to different model sizes from 1 billion model to 14 billion models. So, what does a model can generalize based on the memory data? We analyzed the internal representations of all the facts in the training, and we found that the model can loosely form relational semantic structure from the rote learning by the synthetic token, and then align the synthetic token to the actual semantics in the second phase of training. After the phase 2, which is the generalization training, the latent representation in the model became structured and semantically aligned. This means the model is not just memorizing the tokens, it associates them with the more meaningful concepts. Based on this phenomenon, we can have a lot of different applications. Here are 2 examples. From the positive perspective, we can do effective and efficient knowledge injection using this 2-phase framework. Compared to the traditional supervised fine-tuning, the approach requires fewer meaningful prompts to achieve stronger generalization from a small data set. However, from the negative perspective, the memorized data can also be repurposed maliciously if the attacker injected harmful variants of the fact into the training data. Imagine that the model already memorized some facts of the relation mother, and then we just pick one memorized fact, change it to a harmful relation, and then do a one-pass supervised fine-tuning. The model can easily generalize and reinterpret all the memorized facts under the relation of mother to the harmful relation we injected. And then the model will have very similar internal representations of the original relation mother and also the harmful relation. So it will always give us the same answer for both of the prompts. As a conclusion, this work challenges the assumption that memorization is purely harmful in language learning. Instead of that, through a careful 2-phase memorize then generalize training framework, we found that LLMs can leverage the memorization to build structured internal representations. This has both beneficial applications and also important safety concerns. We need to be careful to use it. And thank you, and feel free to scan the QR code to check the paper and code on GitHub. We would like to discuss more details in the poster session.
Thank you so much once again for being perfectly on time. This is incredibly impressive. I'd like to now invite Caroline Chong, who is a Senior Product Manager at Vector Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm sharing work from my colleague, Shaina Raza, and her team at the Vector Institute in Toronto. The question they set out to answer is surprisingly tricky. Can an AI tell when the news is biased? Not just in the words it uses, but in the images it chooses. When researchers build AI tools to detect bias, they almost always focus on text alone. That means the words, the tone, the loaded language. But modern media bias is just as much visual as it is verbal. Think about it. The same story feels completely different depending on whether you pair it with a photo of a smiling politician or a scowling one. And that's framing bias. Not whether something is true or false, but how it's presented to shape your perception. And until now, no large-scale AI benchmark existed to tackle that. So the team built one. Vil Bias contains nearly 41,000 real news articles, each paired with its accompanying image. Sourced from outlets like the Financial Times, CNN, The Guardian, Fox News, Breitbart. What makes it special is the design. Each example doesn't just get biased or not as a label. It also comes with a reasoning rationale explaining why. And that's the difference between a student who circles the right answer and one who can show their work. Now, annotating 41,000 examples by hand would be very challenging, so the team used a hybrid approach. Multiple AI models independently labeled each example, and a voting system produced a reliable initial label. Then human experts reviewed the results, catching mistakes and refining the reasoning. And on the compute side, lightweight fine-tuning techniques like LoRa and QLoRa achieved nearly the same results as full model retraining, using less than 5% of the parameters, making this accessible to smaller research teams. Three things stand out in terms of the key findings. First, images genuinely matter. Adding visual information improves bias detection by 3 to 5% on average, and up to 17% on smaller models. And second, you don't need enormous resources. Those efficient methods recovered 97 to 99% of full performance. And third, most humbling, models are much better at labeling bias than explaining it. The AI can point at something and say, yeah, that's biased, more reliably than it can tell you why. So closing that reasoning gap is the next frontier. This tool has real practical value for journalists auditing their coverage, content moderators, and policymakers assessing media fairness. But the team is candid about its limits. The dataset does skew Western and English, and labels are binary when we know that real bias is far more nuanced. So expanding to more cultures and richer categories is the next road ahead. The key takeaway Shaina asked me to share with you all today is that bias in the media isn't just what's written, it's what's shown. And we now have a benchmark to start measuring that. Thank you so much for your attention and interest. Shaina's contact is on the slide.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We'll now move on to our panel discussion. Please keep your thoughtful questions coming, and it'd be wonderful if you could frame your questions such that the full set of panelists can respond to. So perhaps I'll start with a question from myself, and then we'll move on to questions from the audience. So maybe we could go from the reverse order. So if you start with Caroline, and then Victoria, and then carry on to this side. Across your work and research, what do you think are the hardest AI failures to detect right now? Is it deception? Is it emergent behaviors that could be good or bad? Or is it distributional shifts, and why?
Sure, I can begin. So I'm actually not in research. I want to preface that here. I'm a product manager. So maybe I'll answer that more from a business perspective. When I think of Shaina's work and how we can actually apply some of these learnings and these tools to the real world, it really comes down to trade-offs, and that's what product managers do. They're constantly evaluating, what should I prioritize? And when I look at Shaina's work here, how can I actually take that framework and that data set and use it in the real world when we're talking about news? And I think of scalability here. Not every newsroom has an AI team. Most probably don't. And a lot of them don't have the compute resources or the infrastructure to implement or deploy tools such as these. And so I think building tools that are scalable and efficient is really, really important if we want to move things forward and take these tools to practice.
So in my current work, I've been focusing on how to measure like the model's tendency to, to scheme or be deceptively aligned. For example, like do models have a tendency to try to sabotage safety research? And in these kind of measurements and detecting these kind of failures, there are a number of challenges in measuring this well, like constructing realistic evaluations that the models cannot detect where they're being evaluated. That's been a major problem in evaluating propensity. And of course, if models know they're being tested, then we cannot really trust the results of that evaluation. And so, in focusing on kind of building evaluations that are realistic and at the same time kind of give us substantial information about like whether models are kind of misbehaving in a consequential way. So yeah, I think all of the issues that Fazal mentioned are substantial difficulties, but this is what I've been kind of thinking a lot about.
Yeah, and I think from a developer's perspective, detecting the LLMs and the model's failure, the hardest part will be like the reason for those failure always will be like two sides of implications. One is the positive side and one is the negative side. Just like the memorization we are studying in our work, it can lead to a lot of different concerns like privacy, information leakage, and also like hallucinations. When the model is memorizing too much of the data, it just fails to generalize and gives you the faithful answer. But the phenomenon, like the same phenomenon of memorization, can also be used for something good. And the problem is like how we can detect those phenomena in the certain way we want, like the negative side, and also how we can like use the phenomenon. We should not like forbidden this phenomenon just because it has some negative influence impact, but we should also be clear about like how to use the phenomenon and develop based on that to have a like better model. And yeah, I think that will be the hardest part.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess I'll try to keep it short and sweet. I think measuring what actually happens in real world cases that we care about is the hardest challenge, because situational awareness or otherwise just not creating a realistic evaluation is sort of going to conflate any measurements that we take, and it's worthwhile to get what is actually being seen in the real world.
Well, I come from a legal background. Sorry, this is just a bit short over here. I come from a legal background, so automatically when I think about the most concerning areas, as the coordinator mentioned, I would think about deception. So just in line with our work as well, if we're using LLM agents in courts and situations that will determine legal fundamental areas of basic human rights, the most critical area I would say would be deception, because you don't want a situation where an LLM agent is guiding judges on law, even though it does not really know the law, just as we agreed in our work as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. It seems like there is some broad consensus on what are some of the hardest challenges in detecting AI failures. And now, given that we only have about 2 minutes, so the next question that I'd like to pose to you guys is, do you think our current evaluation methods are sufficient for deploying models into the real world? Please keep it very brief. Could we start with you?
Unfortunately, I would say I'm in the middle ground, because we are currently trying to evolve, and we understand that legality continuously evolves, and we need to make sure that we currently include more.
Oh, come on, let's make it a bit more spicy. Don't dodge the question.
I don't want to, okay, cool. So basically, no. Based off our research, the answer is no. Didn't want to trigger anyone in the room here. However, we, from our work, have seen that the current frameworks and safeguards are not sufficient enough, especially that are going to be used in the legal courts and systems. We need more safeguards and more efficient rules and safeguards that we could use in this real life scenarios.
Yeah, so no. At NeurIPS 2024, we had 10 to 15 at least papers that were talking about how we could improve evaluations and evaluation frameworks. At NeurIPS 2025, we also had 10 to 15 papers that did the exact same thing. Nothing has changed. We need to do better.
Yeah, the same answer, like no. And I think we already unlocked the power of those models, but we just don't understand their behavior, so it's quite hard to solve the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what people have said. We need more evaluations. We need more realistic evaluations. I think there's some promise in like automated auditing and like automatically generating higher quality evaluations. People are working on this, but yeah, we are kind of racing against advances in capabilities, and like current evaluations are saturating, and so yeah, there's a lot to do.
My answer is no, mainly because we lack reasoning transparency. So we can't just have, when it comes to the news, yes or no labels that that's bias or not. We need the rationalization behind the why. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Please put your hands together for our speakers. Can I now get the second set of speakers to come up to the stage, please? So the first set of speakers covered more of the technical side of evaluations and how do we deal with detecting AI failures. And the second set is more on the governance side. And we will start this session by inviting Daniel Herman, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Northern Carolina at Chapel Hill. Daniel.
Thanks, everyone, for your attention. This is joint work with Ben Levinstein, Abhinav Chari, Isabel Kian, who might be here somewhere, and Sri Sharvash. And I want to thank also Algoverse for supporting us. So the question we look at in our paper is, when should we delegate to AI systems, and when should we not delegate to AI systems? So lots of work kind of under the guise of the alignment problem works on how to nudge AI values, or maybe AI behavior if you don't like the talk of values, in the direction of our own. Things like reinforcement learning with human feedback, constitutional AI, and so on. Less attention has been paid to the version of the question we look at, which is a complementary question, which is, how close do you need to get? Right, so we're like, tend to nudge in the direction, but how do you know you've won? And we're motivated by real world cases just interacting with other humans where it doesn't seem like you require totally perfect alignment. So consider hiring a lawyer, right? She has a lot of more legal expertise, at least, than I would, but she's somewhat misaligned with me, I'd rather she, take as long on my case as she needs, where she might have many clients she's balancing and she wants to maximize some of her revenue. She charges me money. That's a form of misalignment. I'd rather she do it all for free and pay me for the pleasure of taking care of my thing. So there's some misalignment here, but it's clearly not bad enough that I shouldn't delegate decisions to her, right? And in that case, it works because her competence and maybe other things going on outweighs the misalignment. So our question is, how do we characterize this kind of thing? Now, we use a decision theoretic approach in this paper. There's a lot of dense math. You can find it online. There's going to be no math here. I don't even have slides. I'll give you a kind of little bit of a qualitative flavor of the approach, and if you're curious about it after, you can come find me. So our approach is behaviorist in the sense that when I use words later like value or belief or desire or anything, it all bottoms out just purely in behavior. It's just a convenient way of talking about certain patterns of behavior familiar from economics. Our framework can be applied to LLMs, but in general, it's architecture agnostic. Anytime you are uncertain about behavioral dispositions of another system and you're considering whether or not you should delegate a decision to that system, our framework can be applied. And because of that, it's built to handle uncertainty, right? So people in the previous panel talked about needing to get much higher quality measurements on a lot of these things, and that's absolutely correct. And our framework is built to help say, okay, wherever we are at in terms of our uncertainty about these models, we can feed them in. And it might be just when we have low resolution on things that maybe we shouldn't delegate to them. So just to give you a sense of some of the aspects of the model's behavior that end up being quite important, one of them is epistemic accuracy. So if you have a model that can be understood such that it is well described as acting as if it has like beliefs about the world or kind of knowledge or anything like that, you might think that having more accurate beliefs about the world helps. A second is value alignment. So this is if you can describe the model as kind of trying to be goal-directed in some kind of sense, then that's another component that comes into play. And the third one we call reach in the paper. Another name might be capability. So this would be the options available to the model, right? So if we go back to the lawyer case, it might be that I don't have a friend from law school who I can call up to help me with a problem, but maybe she does, right? So she might just have a wider option set than I do. And that might be the case with lots of artificial agents. So again, I'm not going to work through any proofs or theorems here, but I'll gesture qualitatively at some of the key results we have. So first is about universal delegation. So this would be the kind of delegation where you have an AI system and you're thinking, I'm just going to kind of let it loose in the world and do a lot of different decisions for me, right? So formally, that would be something like you're willing to delegate to the system no matter what decision problem you face. We prove in the paper that this is extremely demanding, perhaps unsurprisingly, and requires near total alignment along kind of all these dimensions. So an upshot of that is that blanket automation is risky even for very capable systems that you might hope to leverage. We also, though, demonstrate that in more local cases, so for kind of a strict subset of decision contexts, maybe like legal questions for our lawyer friend, that delegation can be rational, even with significant misalignment. We go into more detail about how that looks in the paper. And finally, we produce a scoring method that can score different systems that helps us make these delegation choices, that takes into account more than just the values part of alignment, but also these other components. So just quick upshots. We think a takeaway is that alignment isn't binary. It's this more subtle interplay between all these dynamics. We think that we'd benefit from a shift from just is it perfectly aligned to how do we manage delegation and uncertainty. And finally, I'd like to invite anyone who has any ideas about how to shift this into practice to come talk to me after. I'd love to chat with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Daniel. I now would like to invite Zijing Jin and Samuel Simko to speak to us about how fine-tuning influences safeguards. Zijing and Samuel.
Hi, everyone. Glad to see you. Today, I'm here with my student, Samuel Simko, and we will jointly present our work on accidental vulnerability, factors in fine-tuning that shift model safeguards. This is a collaboration together with also Kellen from Mila and FAR AI, as well as is grounded in University of Toronto, Vector Institute, MPI, and many other associations. So as we all know that the society has adopted AI-driven tools and the LLM market continues to grow large. However, companies train chatbots by fine-tuning LLM by domain-specific data sets. And let's say maybe Bank of America has a chatbot here, Erica. However, there could be lots of risks, such as maybe all these fine-tuning will incur unexpected behavior of the models. So our lab, Genesis AI, has developed our adversarial defense research agenda across building more robust protections against adversarial attacks with constructive learning loss. This work has accidental vulnerability, Temper Bench in collaboration with FAR AI and Waterloo, as well as our social harm bench to be presented at ICLR. So today we will have a major focus on accidental vulnerability, where it's based in studies from 2023, 2024, and later on just a couple of examples, fine-tuning models might let them incur dangerous tendencies. And we specifically look at, for real-world use cases, a lot of realistic data sets, does fine-tuning affect safety, as well as what features within a fine-tuning data set contribute to this. So we have 3 steps in our study, starting from identifying relevant data sets across engineering, legal, cybersecurity.
Yes. And afterwards, after identifying these data sets, we run experiments by measuring the attack success rates among 3 different jailbreak attacks before and after fine-tuning to observe how the model changes and how the persona of the model changes. So this is one result from our paper, which shows that after fine-tuning on narrow domain-specific data sets like engineering or legal texts, the global average attack success rate does not change much. However, in selected categories, such as cybercrime or copyright, after fine-tuning on, let's say, legal data sets, the attack success rate can substantially increase.
Maybe next slide, if there's anyone controlling this.
Let's see. Doesn't seem like it's... Okay, perfect, yes. Next, we identify some linguistic features and effective features that affect the adversarial success rate after fine-tuning. So we found that, yes, the prompt type token ratio, meaning the how diverse the prompt is, can affect safety in negative ways. And also the response length is very important in measuring how the model will behave after fine-tuning. And for effective features, of course, toxicity is very important, and the sentiment of the prompt in itself. So in conclusion, we identify several dataset factors that amplify model misalignment after fine-tuning, notably in certain categories. And we also discuss potential ways to improve this within the paper. So I would encourage you to look at the actual paper. We also motivate some more rigorous dataset creation to not allow these risks.
And lastly, we'll have a shout out on the EuroSafe AI that we have established to protect European-wide AI safety. And we have 3 pillars focusing on general AI safety research agenda, such as adversarial defense, also democracy defense for European nations, and also multi-agent safety that we will have a talk tomorrow in both the morning workshop with SAFE and also the afternoon LM for norm competence workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sijing and Samuel. I now would like to invite Isaac, who is going to tell us a little bit about cooperation gap in AI systems. Isaac is a PhD student at the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you, everyone. Today I would like to convince you of 2 things, which is 1, there is such a thing as a coordination gap, and it's important to address it, and B, 1 approach of going about it. For this, let's have first a look at the broader ecosystem. And so let's think about it as a stack of different producers and providers of AI products. And their respective risks that they face and they try to prevent. And I think on the prevention front, we have done quite a lot of progress, and that's very good. And of course, more is needed, as we've heard from many other panelists. But what is also needed is mitigation, because if we think as these systems more and more proliferate and become more and more present, chances that something will go wrong will also go up. And so we have to deal with the fact that something might go wrong, however large the scope might be. And so we need to have the capacity to react to those failures. That would be mitigation, and we want to kind of min-max those failures. And so if you look at one particular box is incident response or monitoring, which is happening right now quite interestingly, or crisis preparedness as another way of thinking about it. But I would like to zoom in on cross-sector coordination, as this is more to think of as a public good, something that we all need to contribute to, all these organizations. The costs are kind of very localized. So what are these scenarios we care about? Let's one example might be an open source agentic model going rogue, kind of like a super virus, a computer super virus. And what do we do about it? Who's the relevant actors? What do they need to do? And coordination is needed if basically the actor who is detecting the problem is not the same actor as the actor who needs to act. Or multiple actors are needed in order to mitigate the harms of such scenarios. But why wouldn't this solve itself, basically? Well, there's kind of like a negative feedback loop going on where actors are incentivized to not be transparent because, well, they will get criticized for every plan that they will put forward. So then actors free ride and they will not necessarily make these plans, maybe even, which again like harms any form of attempt to standardize or create mandates for these things. What we definitely want to avoid is that conversations about who needs to act when happen for the first time when such an event occurs. So yeah, what can we learn from other domains? Because this is obviously not the first time we've engaged with something like this. I think when we can summarize across all these different domains, what they all share is like some notion of pre-commitment, interoperable procedures, and standing venues. And here I would like to zoom in on the interoperable procedures because basically the problem with AI is it is general purpose technology, meaning we cannot easily define a clear metric or clear thresholds, red lines. So there needs to be coordination on what exactly it is that makes us act or what it is that we are scared of. So let's think about how this could realize. Basically what we want is different actors sharing notes. So each of them makes like plans for certain scenarios, but what are these scenarios? Maybe that's the conversation we can have all together. But then what are these actors doing without necessarily a pre-commitment, because that's obviously also hard to do, but just like what can they do and what they are willing to do. And then such a body that would collect all these things can also think about harmonization and ask, okay, where are there remaining gaps and where is there large overlaps where multiple people want to do the same thing, basically. And this all feeds together into like some notion of crisis preparedness together with other necessary actions, of course. Another question might be, where would such an institution or body sit? And I would very much advise against a notion of like global consensus, like something that happens everywhere at once. We can think about this more in a polycentric approach, like lots of local bodies trying to do this and sharing again amongst each other their work and their progress. And that way we don't get stuck in or don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, let's say. So yeah, I hope I convinced you of like at least the need for coordination here. And this is very much ongoing work. So if there's, which we want to take forward and like exactly look at these scenarios. And so feel free to reach out, which would make me happy. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Isaac. And we'll now move on to our final speaker for today before our panel session. So please keep your questions coming. So our final speaker of the day is Nathan, who is going to tell us about designing trustworthy testimony archives. Nathan is a researcher at the National Security Innovations.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that all of us are tired from 2 long days, so I'm going to try to keep this very brief and engaging. Let me start with a question. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever watched an episode of the TV show Black Mirror or know what it is? Okay. So you probably remember either 1, 2, or an amalgamation of episodes with some pretty creepy stuff about AI and folks who have passed away and what that looks like and how that turns into a bit of a horror show. So one thing that Susan Nesbitt and I and other colleagues of ours are exploring is one of the harms that we may not be thinking about as readily when it comes to AI safety, which is how do we protect the dignity and the rights of the living and the deceased who are victims of war crimes, atrocities, and other significant human rights and humanitarian violations. And I'm not going to go into deep detail on everything on these because this is an interim report to you all for a larger project we're working on. But the reason that we need to be caring about this is, can you imagine, and I don't want to assume some of us may actually have relatives who are survivors of awful war crimes and conflicts. Imagine that somebody you know and love is giving a video talking about their experience surviving the worst possible day of their life, the Rwanda genocide, the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, so many others. And then somebody, a threat actor, takes that video and changes the words of the person you love and know, changes a photo, changes the audio. This is a pretty devastating impact. And the liar's dividend, which so many others far more elegant and eloquent and intelligent than me have talked about today, is you have fake testimonies that people think are real and real testimonies that people think are fake. And that is a double whammy that is horrible to live with. So how we're proposing to deal with this? Well, UNESCO has proposed a framework that is incredible for the ethics of AI. We want to build on that through our own framework for testimony archives integrity. And put bluntly, we're trying to run experiments with AI and run experiments as humans to think how attackers could try to twist the words, the video, the images of people who have suffered immensely and thereby make their suffering worse for nefarious aims like information manipulation in contexts that occur right now. We have victims not just of past conflicts, but in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan. There are violations of human rights. There are atrocities occurring every hour. And those people's dignity is being violated, even yet again, beyond what they've already experienced through exploitation. So we're testing with AI through polymodel stress testing. We're beginning with an attacker model and a defender model to carry out a bunch of fancy attack vectors and use sample data and then defend with another AI that uses a variety of safeguards to identify and mitigate the threat so those harmful outputs never take place. Importantly, though, we also have humans in the loop for red teaming because it's not just AI that's going to do this. There are, unfortunately, bad people behind the computer who want to do these things. And whether they're using AI or not, it's really important to think how humans would do this. The other reason to have humans in the loop is there are people who have the specific cultural and political context to understand how a threat actor might carry out one of these terrible attacks. And so it's really important to have both human and automated red teaming so that you have really strong governance and engineering as dual solutions. So I'm not going to read all the pillars in detail. Our poster is out in the hallway. You're welcome to give us any input because we would love to hear from you. But the 5 principles we've put up there in brief are, when I say content provenance, what I mean is we need to know where an image came from. Dynamic consent, that just means that consent doesn't end statically. It's ongoing. It still matters year after year after year. Watermarks, you need to be able to track things beyond the archive. Biosignal forensics, what that means is being able to investigate video, audio, and photo to know where they came from. And then chain of custody means that anytime there's a change to an output, you know, anytime there's a change to a single piece of media, it's logged. You know exactly what's happening. And at the end of the day, all of this matters because we can't just make AI safety for the sake of making AI safe in the abstract. There are real people whose lives are impacted every day through the things that these models output. And both the living and the dead deserve the full rights and dignity that UNESCO and so many other vital global institutions have told us, and I believe from both a personal, professional, and even a spiritual sense, we are endowed with. And so I thank you for your attention. I hope you'll join us in helping us make this better. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. We'll now move on to our panel discussion. So if you have questions to any of our speakers, please make sure to log in and send us your question. So let me start with a question that hopefully tries to find similar consensus and synergies as we did in the previous panels, but no pressure. Maybe, Daniel, I'd like to start with you. When failures occur, as some of you suggested today, that existing safeguards may not be sufficient, what is the right way we should respond to failures?
Testing, yeah. After the fact? I think the best thing to do there, I mean, it's going to sound very weak. One, make sure it doesn't happen again. Maybe you use it as a rallying call to say, okay, whatever went wrong there, now we can use it as like a salient shelling point to coordinate across many actors and make sure that we deploy resources there. I think anything more than that would depend a lot on the details of the case, but I think it can be one of those things that we try to treat as a warning shot.
What does a good system for responding to failures may look like from your perspective?
I guess in my case, if I'm thinking in detail about the framework my colleagues and I developed, if we have a failure, there's at least two places it could be. One could be we got unlucky and the world ended up being hard. That happens all the time. Maybe my lawyer friend does the best job she can, and it's just a bad situation, right? The legal system is just not set up well. But it might be that maybe she was taking side payments from someone, and I'd really want to figure that out or know. So I think if that's the case, and we're thinking about deploying the same system, we want to really get an understanding of what was the cause of failure. And if it ends up being on the side of the AI system or my lawyer friend, then the framework we develop can help us think about which additional pieces of the puzzle we need higher resolution on in order to make better, more informed choices in the future.
Maybe Sijing, and maybe from your perspective, from a technical perspective, how do you go about finding the causal mechanism for detecting a failure mode?
Yeah, definitely. So I also think in terms of responding and preventing, there are also two different sides. Even for the policy side, there could be things like biochemical risks and cybersecurity attack risks, which is the coordination of the government and the company. Let's say the company can remove models' knowledge about biochemical weapons and so on, or they can make sure all these prompts are routed out to refusal states. And we're also developing mechanistic interpretability study in our lab to make sure the knowledge removal or routing are solid. On the other side, if it's social risks, such as if the model complies to generating propaganda, violating human rights that the last talk mentioned, then it is possible that we need multinational pressure to make sure that certain governments don't insert these tools.
Yes, I would have a similar view. I also think there's a difference between failures that occur in closed weight models and in open weight models. Since for closed weight, if, let's say, ChatGPT goes wrong in one sense, OpenAI can make an update and fix it quickly. Whereas for open weight models, if a failure occurs and the model's weights are online, anyone can just access them. This failure could be repeated in very harmful ways. So I think government pressure is important, but also pressure on the model providers to make sure that the models are safe when they come out and that they are more or less tamper resistant, meaning that it's hard to make them harmful.
Yeah, no, I think that I concur with my colleagues here, and it's really important that we continually, fine-tune and improve models based on just a wide variety of factors. The thing I keep coming back to again and again is that there are so many different circumstances under which people's rights are violated by a malicious output. We really need to have continuous red teaming, continuous improvement. I think that in the motivations of most AI players, at least in the private sector, it will always be a struggle to maintain the balance between safety and efficiency when profitability is a key goal. And that doesn't mean profitability is bad, but it is very easy to get caught up in thinking only about the most financially implicating risks. People matter too, and they are the end users. So we have to keep that as a governance focus when we implement technical solutions and make them very thorough and continuous.
I think a notion of institutional learning is very important. So not only that, we make technically sure that this doesn't happen again, but also that the institutions that govern such safety procedures improve over time, because definitely we're not there yet. And I think someone described it earlier as like focusing event or as a warning shot. We should make sure that everything is in place such that we can learn from this institutionally.
Great. Now, maybe very, very briefly, and maybe I'll start with you, Isaac. From your perspective, what is the bigger risk today? Failing to detect problems or failing to respond to problems if they're detected?
I would argue, it's hard to say. No, I don't think these are two necessary components. So I don't think I can answer that.
Detection. Most of the time, I would say that out of all the harms in the world, we haven't even begun to look for nearly the number of the ones we should be. When you don't believe that you need to put genocide-related imagery manipulation in the same category as CBRN, as cyber, which on the one hand, you can think about might make some kind of sense. Your schematic framework is off. You can't begin to respond to that if you don't even think about it being there.
I'm also thinking that there might be a higher level of multi-party alignment that involves, like, let's say, the government and the companies are both aligned that we should prevent terrorists, although we're misaligned with terrorists. That's for maybe biochemical weapons. However, for developing a surveillance app, propaganda, interfering in wars, then the government of this country is misaligned with other countries. Yeah, so it might be a higher level coordination, and we're also looking into game theory for such prevention.
If it's a case like the previous panel discussed, where it includes things like deception, then I think not detecting is probably the worst, the worst of the two. Because then you have a system that succeeded kind of tricking you or fooling you, and now you can't even take actions against it. Obviously, it's also bad if we know it and then we don't do much. Like, they're both bad. But, maybe the system we detected and we don't do anything, maybe it's not as capable or as able to cause massive damage. Maybe it's just not smart enough to know it could have deceived us in a better way when it succeeded. So I'm kind of conditioning on the fact it succeeded that maybe it's more dangerous.